Good evening and welcome to this evening, an evening of song, study, and inspiration in tribute to the 59th Yartzeit of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yitzchak Schneerson, who passed away on the 10th day of Shvat in the year Yud 1950, also the day when his son-in-law, the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe, assumed the leadership of the Chabad Lubavitch movement. We want to welcome all of the communities and individuals who are joining us here live this evening, literally from all over the world, whether in your homes, in your shuls, in your synagogues, in your Chabad centers or other centers. Welcome to all of you. This evening's gathering and evening is dedicated to a dear friend and colleague, Levi Yitzchak ben Tzirul. May God grant him a complete and speedy recovery. Amen. L'chaim. We will begin with two melodies. I'm joined here by Chazan Beryl Zucker and his Hasidic choir, among others. We will begin with two melodies. The first is a Hasidic, heartwarming, and deeply introspective melody, one of the favorites and most beloved melodies by the person whose Yartzeit we're commemorating today, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. The name of this melody is the Beinani. It will be followed by a more joyous and festive melody, and we ask all of you, wherever you are, to join us and sing along. The Beinani. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away, as I said, on the 10th of Shvat in the year 1950. It was a Shabbos morning, a Saturday morning at approximately 10 to 8 a.m. in his home on 770 Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, New York, on the second floor, where he returned to his soul to its maker that Shabbat morning. There is no known final will and testament which the Rebbe wrote or gave out before his passing, which came out after his passing. But there was something else which has assumed enormous significance, especially when this time of the year comes around. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, would publish for each holiday or special day on the calendar a Hasidic discourse, known as a Maimer. On the 10th of Shvat, he had Yartzeit for his grandmother. His grandmother, his father's mother, whose name was Rivka, the wife of the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe, known as Rabbi Shmuel, the Rebbe Maharash. His grandmother, Rivka, passed away also on the 10th of Shvat. His mother's Yartzeit is on the 13th of Shvat. So for the 10th of Shvat, 1950, which was on Shabbos, the Lubavitcher Rebbe published and gave out a special Hasidic discourse to be studied and learned in honor of the Yartzeit of his mother. It happened to be that on that very same day, he also passed away. And thus, Chabad Hasidim and his successor, the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, came to see this discourse as the final message which the Rebbe left with his pupils, disciples, and students the world over before leaving our earth and returning back to heaven. And in one particular Yud Shevat gathering, one gathering on the 10th of Shvat in 1972, the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe, addressed this theme and explained how in this discourse, his father-in-law, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, was presenting and encapsulating a final message, almost like a will and testament which he would leave with the Jewish people before his own passing. The discourse which the Rebbe published for this day begins with a verse in the Song of Songs, in Shir Hashirim. In the Song of Songs there is a verse, Basi Legani Achoisi Kala. In it, King Solomon describes the day when the tabernacle, the sanctuary, was erected in the desert. And he describes that day as the groom, being a metaphor for God, saying, Basi Legani, I came back to my garden to be with Achoisi Kala, my sister, my bride. And the Midrash explains, and this is quoted in the discourse, that God calls the world my garden. I came back, I returned to my garden where I used to be. When I created the world, I was there, I was present. But then, as a result of human transgression, failure, corruption, and perversion, I, so to speak, departed from my garden. And now I am returning. This is the opening verse and discussion of this mimer, of this discourse, which the Rebbe gave out to learn for the day when he would ultimately pass away, the 10th day of Shvat, 1950. And it's in this very opening that the Rebbe, his son-in-law, saw a critical and valuable message that his father-in-law wanted to share with the world during his last moments before he would end his journey on our planet. And tonight, I wish to present to you one aspect, one point of that idea. You know, they tell a story about Sherlock Holmes has his short stories with his experiences with Dr. Watson. And in one of those experiences, he goes camping with Dr. Watson. And they go to the forest or to the park, and they build a beautiful bonfire, and then they construct a lovely tent. And both of them, Sherlock and Dr. Watson, go to sleep in the tent. In the middle of the night, Sherlock Holmes turns to Dr. Watson, looks up at the heavens, and says, "Dr. Watson, what do you see up there?" Dr. Watson looks up and he says, "I'm gazing at the stars and my heart melts away in ecstasy as I'm looking at the kingdom of night. I'm gazing at the beauty and the splendor and the grandeur and the mystique of the celestial formations in God's universe." And he waxes eloquent about the emotional experience of looking at the world and the beauty of night's kingdom. "Sherlock, how about you? What do you see?" And Sherlock Holmes says, "I see that somebody stole our tent." So you see, everything and every experience has two perspectives. If one knows even a little bit about the life story, the biography of the person whose Yartzeit we commemorate this evening, the previous 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef, Yitzchak, Schneerson, one knows that his life was a perpetual living nightmare. He was a captain of the Jewish ship. He was a leader of the Jewish people in what you might call the worst and darkest era in Jewish history, where there arose two individual persons, two people, who were the personification of evil in its most radical manifestation. History has never seen two such tyrants, two such murderers on a mass scale like Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler. And they both lived, functioned, and achieved part of their dark goals in the same era. Stalin emerging in the Soviet Union, Hitler emerging in Germany. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, a faithful shepherd of his people, living in the former Soviet Union, succeeded the position of his father as Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1920, only 3 years after the revolution, and 4 years before Vladimir Lenin died, and Stalin would take the reins of the Soviet Union and lead the empire of Russia, the Russian Empire, for 30 years until his death in March 1953. During these years, Stalin would murder approximately 20 or 30 million people. Some historians even elevate the number higher. In Germany, the Third Reich would be led by Hitler, Yamach Shemoy, who would exterminate tens of millions, including, of course, the 6 million Jews and 1.5 million children in Eastern Europe, a third of the Jewish people who were decimated. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, as a loyal and faithful leader of the Jewish people, endured, as so many other Jews and so many other Jewish leaders, this black hole, this blackest and darkest of times. He was arrested, he was tortured, he was exiled, he was sentenced to death, although saved at the last moment. He watched hundreds and thousands of his own pupils, Hasidim followers, be sent to the gulags, exiled, or just shot. He created a network of 600 underground Jewish day schools. Imagine, 600 underground Jewish day schools. During the years when he led the Russian Jewry, he created a secret network of ambassadors, of shluchim, of emissaries, to hold up Yiddishkeit, to hold up Judaism. the study of Torah, the celebration of mitzvot, in underground cellars on rooftops in Stalin's regime. Then the Rebbe ultimately left the Soviet Union, moved to Poland, found himself in Nazi-occupied Warsaw in 1939 and then in 1940 until he finally escaped to New York. In the Holocaust, he lost many of his own family members, including a daughter and a son-in-law, and many others. Of course, many Hasidim and many Jews. In addition to this, the Rebbe was very ill. He was physically very ill already in the 1930s. He had many illnesses which caused his body to deteriorate swiftly. By the time he came to the US in 1940, he was paralyzed, and half his body, it was very difficult for the Rebbe to speak, to communicate. Based on all of this and much more, and to sum it up, it reminds me, one of the people who worked in the home of the previous Rebbe shared with me once that he heard from the Rebbe's wife, Rebbetzin Chamadina Schneerson, who once shared with him, with this person, that once after seeing people, one evening she went into her husband's room on the second floor of 770 Eastern Parkway. She saw that her husband is weeping profusely. She asked him, "Was weinst du? Why are you crying?" And he related to her, he said, Ich kann schon nicht aushalten, the Tzaras from the Yiddish folk. I can't bear anymore the tragedies, the suffering of the Jewish nation. Now, after 69 years, the Rebbe would be summoned to his Father in heaven and return his weary and courageous soul to its Maker. What would we expect would be his final message? His son-in-law asked. What would we think would be his final communicating words to his followers? What would he want to leave us with? You might think he would express a sentiment. I did my duty. I served my people. I fulfilled my mission. I'm happy to leave a world of such darkness, falsehood, evil. A world that can see so many innocents suffer and not say a word in protest. To a world of truth. He may bless, try to inspire and give strength to the people he would leave behind to continue the journey of history and of Jewish history. But instead, the final words of the Rebbe were something else. Let us remember that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe did not hear about the calamities. He observed them, he experienced them. In the words of Jeremiah, who writes in the book of Eicha, of Lamentations, Yirmiyahu, Anavi, Jeremiah, the prophet, who saw the temple go up in flames, and says, Ani hagevera ani. I am the man who saw the affliction. I didn't hear it on the radio or read it on a website. I saw it, I experienced it. I saw the temple go up in flames. And therefore he cried and never stopped crying, Eicha yashva vadad. Ha'ira basiyam ha'isa kalmana, the opening verse of Lamentations of Eicha. How can the city so filled with people become so lonely? A city so populated with the Jewish nation has been widowed. The Lubavitcher Rebbe saw European Jewry go up in flames. He saw Warsaw go up in flames. He saw the millions and millions of Jews who perished, who were barbarically exterminated by these two evil monsters, first Stalin and then Hitler and then Stalin again after the war. He saw it, he felt it, he endured it, he experienced it. He was himself physically crushed and broken. But the last words he left us with, the Rebbe said, were Basi legani achaisi kala, a verse in which God calls the world my garden. His final message was, I know the pain, I know the suffering, I'm aware of the anguish, I experienced the turmoil, and there's no way of easily removing that, or ignoring it, or repressing it. And yet, deep down, I maintain that profound perspective of Judaism, that the world essentially is a divine garden. A garden, we know, an orchard, is a place where people come to enjoy themselves. Zu pasmakeven sich. That's the Yiddish word for kvelling. To appreciate it, to glean the light from it. People stroll and sit in an orchard and it fills their soul with the beauty and the aroma of the garden. So God doesn't only call the world a necessary evil to deal with, not even a necessary place which we must live in order to experience our goals and ultimately enter the real world, the world to come, paradise. No. Basi legani achaisi kala. I came back to my garden. He calls the world a garden. The world, in other words, inherently, essentially and intrinsically is a place that has enormous potential for positivity, for rejuvenation, for growth, and for goodness and kindness. The world essentially, the Rebbe was saying, was a good place. Embrace it, love it, cherish it. Embrace your life in the world, because with the proper perspective and work, you will be able to transform the world into a divine orchard. Of course, the orchard is filled with weeds. The orchard is sometimes filled with thorns. The orchard is sometimes filled with components that obstruct and contradict the world as being a garden. And it's the challenge of humanity, and it's the challenge of the Jewish people to remove the weeds, to cleanse and purge the world from its selfishness, from its violence, from its blood, from its egocentricity, from the conflicts that exist in the world. But the focus is knowing that deep down, the potential of the world has enormous positive energy within it. Our job is to expose it. So, you could see the same reality. One sees that somebody stole our tent, and one sees the beautiful kingdom of night. This reminds me of the time when a young woman wrote a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This was in 1961, I believe, in which she lamented and complained how miserable her life was. Her life was hopeless. It was filled with darkness. It was bleak. Nothing was working out. And she enumerated a list of all of her problems and challenges. The Rebbe wrote back a letter to her. And in the letter he communicates the following message. He says like this: I want to contrast two moments of history to you. One moment, the first. Adam is in the Garden of Eden, in Genesis, in paradise. God tells him, you can eat from everything. Eat from every tree. One tree don't touch. Of course, he and his wife eat from that tree. And God confronts him and says, from the tree that I told you not to eat from, you had to eat. And of course, as the first Jewish husband, who does he blame? It's my wife. And it's the wife that you gave me. You're to blame. You gave me the wife. And the rabbis say, the sages say, Rashi quotes it, Adam was a kafui toiva. He was given a gift, and instead of extending a thank you, instead of paying gratitude to the one who gave him the gift, he was a kafui toiva, which means he rejected the gift and rejected the one who gave him the gift. Totally ungrateful. Which occurs sometimes. You help somebody, you give somebody, and they reciprocate with negative energy or with negative action. So if you would have asked Adam at that moment, how is life? He would have said, it's terrible. God gave me this wife, and she drove me crazy. She gave me this fruit and had me cursed, and ultimately will have me die, would have me die because of it. So Adam is in the paradise. He has nothing to worry about. There was no recession. There was no mortgage crisis. He didn't have to pay tuition. He didn't have to burn a mortgage. He had no issues with health insurance. He was supposed to live forever. Life was perfect. But if you would have asked him, how is life? He'd say, it's terrible. Do you have anything to be grateful about? Me, grateful. I have been cursed. And then the Rebbe continues that he knew Jews who were in the camps. They were in the concentration camps. They had nothing. Everything was taken from them. Their loved ones, their families, their souls, their bodies. They were skeletons, Muslim. In the morning they used to wake up and they would recite Birchas HaShachar. They would recite the blessings, which in the Jewish tradition we recite in the morning. We say, thank you, God, for giving me another day. Thank you, God, for allowing me to breathe another day, for giving me a soul. You would look at their life, at their circumstances, they had nothing. But they said thank you. What did they say thank you for? They were alive. They woke up one more day. They're here to see the sunrise. They're here, they're present. And they were thankful for that. So he said, you see, you could be in Gan Eden, you could be in paradise, and have everything, but you don't have what to be thankful for. You're a kafui toiva. You can't say thank you to God. And there's a person who is in circumstances deprived from everything, and he finds what to say thank you about. Why? Because it's usually not about the circumstances. It's about your attitude. It's about your perspective. It's what you choose to focus on and to experience. Most of us, he concludes the letter, are not in paradise, in Adam's or Eve's paradise. And thank God, today we're not in the camps, in the death camps, where so many Jews were just 6 decades ago, 6.5 decades ago. We're in between, somewhere in between. And it's our choice. It's the choice we make in life. So what was the final message that the Rebbe left the world with? He gave out a discourse beginning with the words, Basi Lagani, I came to my garden. Is in life, you have a choice. Either you could sing Eicha, you can cry Eicha, or you could sing Shir Hashirim. Both are true. The world can be a very dark and bloody and evil place. And nobody knew it more than the one whose Yartzeit is on the 10th of Shevat. But he chose to communicate and to inculcate the message of Basi Lagani Achaisi Kala, that the world essentially is a garden. Cherish it, develop it, embrace it, celebrate it. Take a look at yourself, take a look at another person, take a look at the world, and see within it the potential for growth, for rejuvenation, and for transformation. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Oh, na 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 ya
You know, they tell the story about a child who's becoming bar mitzvah. So he approaches his mother, he has to give a bar mitzvah speech, and he says, "Ma, can you tell me about the history of our family? Who do we come from?" And his mother begins to describe her parents and her grandparents. "No, I want to go way back. Where do we come from, all the way from the beginning? What is the origin of our family?" She says, I'll tell you about Adam and Eve. And she talks to him about Adam and Eve and how God created them in the garden and the tree of knowledge and Cain and Abel and so on and so forth. Okay, so he has that down pat. Now he goes to Daddy, comes to his father and says, "Daddy, where do we come from?" And Daddy begins describing his parents and his grandparents. No, the beginning of everything. Where do we really come from? Who are our first progenitors? And Daddy says we come from the apes. We are products, we are children. After many millions and billions of years, we have emerged and evolved from the apes. The child is innocent and confused. He comes back to Mom. He says, "Ma, what's going on? I ask you, who were our progenitors? And you tell me Adam and Eve. I ask Daddy, who are our progenitors? And he tells me apes." There's a contradiction here. She says, "Son, there's no contradiction. I was talking about my side of the family. He was, I guess, talking about his side of the family." You see, the above-mentioned discussion about two perspectives, how you look at the world, also exists on a microscopic level, not just in the macrocosm, but also in the microcosm. Because when we look at a human being, we can also assume one of two things. One school of philosophy believes that a person inherently is either evil, or if not evil, certainly prone to selfishness and narcissism. One school of philosophy or psychology would believe that the human being at best is a neutral creature, but usually extremely egocentric, if not completely chaotic and narcissistic at his or her core. In the Jewish approach, however, basi legania chaisikala, the human being inherently and intrinsically is divine. The human being at his or her core is filled with goodness, is a mirror of the potential, is a mirror of the goodness and kindness of his Creator, and therefore the potentiality within a human being is very powerful and positive. Is there real hope when it comes to people, or there's no hope? I want to share with you a lovely Hasidic insight that deals with this theme that we're discussing. There is a very strange midrash in this week's Torah portion, in the book of Exodus in Beshalach. The midrash describes the Jewish people after they left Egypt, they came to the sea, and the sea split. When they came to the Red Sea, pursued by the Egyptians in back of them, there was now a sea in front of them. The sea split, it parted, and the Jewish people passed through the sea, as you know, ultimately on their way to Sinai. The term used for this in the book of Psalms, in Hallel, Hayom Ra Vayonos. The sea saw and fled. And the Midrash asks, Mara, what did the sea see? See as in S-E-E-A, see as in S-E-E. Mara, what did the sea observe? Hayam Ra, the sea saw something and it fled. What did it see? What did it observe? And the Midrash answers, Arono shel Yosef Ra. The sea observed the coffin of Joseph. Moses, we read in the beginning of Beshalach, was carrying the bones of Joseph with him, which he took when they left Egypt. Moses, the leader, took the bones of Joseph with him en route from Egypt, ultimately through the desert towards the land of Israel. And when the sea observed the bones of Joseph, the sea fled, the sea split. And the Midrash says, why? And the Midrash says the word Vayonos is used one more time in the Bible. It says in Psalms, the sea fled, but there was one more thing or person who fled, Joseph. In Genesis, there is a verse. Potiphar's wife was attempting to violate Joseph. For a long time, she attempted to persuade him to engage with her in a promiscuous, immoral relationship. And finally, the day came. He was not home, and nobody was home. And he came home. She remained there. Nobody was home, and she turned to him and she said, Shich v'imi, lay with me. And Joseph had no choice but to flee, to escape. He fled the home, and she was holding his cloak. His cloak tore, and she held on to part of his cloak, and ultimately she has him incarcerated in Egypt. When the sea saw the bones of Joseph and how Joseph fled the home, the sea also fled. The sea also ran away. The sea also parted. It ran away from its position, and dry land was created, and the Jewish people walked through the land. What's the meaning of this midrash? It's a very strange observation. What is the connection between Joseph fleeing and the sea fleeing? Why would the sea only observe Joseph's coffin and then flee? If not for that, the sea would not flee, so it seems. What was it about Joseph that caused the sea to part ways? Now you know there's another very interesting midrash. The Talmud tells us, the rabbis say, Vayashav hayom la'eitano litno. It says in this week's portion, after the Jews parted the sea, the sea came back to its original condition. La'eisano, to its original strength. It's the same letters like the word litna'o, to its condition. The sages say that God, when He created the Red Sea, He created it with a stipulation, with a condition. He said this, I'm creating you on condition that when the day comes and the Jewish people need you to part, you will part. If you agree to this condition, I'm going to create you. If not, let's forget our relationship, I will not create you. So the sea agreed to this condition. And thus, it split for the Jewish people. And that's the meaning of the word, la'eisano litna'o. There was a condition God made with the Red Sea, according to our rabbis. If that's the case, the sea needed to split. It was compelled to split. It had to fulfill its obligation. Seas don't have breaches of contract. It made a contract with God. It couldn't refuse. And yet from the Midrash it would seem that it was only because of Joseph's coffin which it observed, which compelled it to split. If it would have not observed Joseph's coffin, it would have not split. It fled because of Joseph. But even if Joseph's coffin was not there, it made a condition. God made a condition with the sea, and it agreed to the condition. It consented that it would part ways. So why the need for Joseph? There is a lovely Hasidic explanation that was given by Rabbi Aaron Karliner. Rabbi Aaron of Karlin was one of the students of the Maggid of Mezrich, the successor of the Baal Shem Tov. And he presents a little insight that I'm going to elaborate on. He says this. You know, the Talmud says that marriages are as difficult as the splitting of the sea. Kasha zivugim kekriyas yamsuf. A marriage is as difficult as splitting the sea. Obviously, the Talmud is trying to say a good marriage is unique. It's special. It's almost miraculous. Because relationships can be very difficult, very complicated. But why did the Talmud use this miracle? The Talmud could have used many other miracles. The Talmud could have said marriage is as difficult as manna falling from heaven. Or marriage is as difficult as the 10 plagues. Well, I guess maybe that's not a good metaphor. Or marriage is as difficult as the clouds of glory that surrounded the Jewish people. I mean, there were many miracles. Why in the Bible there are many supernatural events? Why does the Talmud use this particular miracle of splitting of the sea to describe the nature of marriage? The answer, my dear friends, is this. You see, when God created the Red Sea, He made a condition with the Red Sea. One day, the Jewish people, the Israelites, will be here. They will be running away from the Egyptians who have subjugated them for 210 years. They have been in exile. Now they're free at last, but the Egyptians want to pursue them and re-enslave them. I need a favor from you, God says to the sea. I need you to part ways. I need you to let them go through in dry land. The sea said, no problem, Almighty God, but just show me the customer. Show me who do you want me to split for? Who do you want me to renounce myself for? So God said, let me show you. This is the third day of creation when the seas and the rivers and the oceans were created. And God takes the sea, the Yam Suf, into the chamber of the souls of the Jewish people. And the sea takes a look at a Yiddish neshama, at a Jewish soul. It says, Gewalt. For these guys, I'll do it every day. For these guys, I'll split every day of my life. I will renounce myself and my identity every day. The sea observed the grandeur of a soul, the depth of a soul, the passion, the purity, the holiness of a neshama, of a soul. A soul is a chelik elekami mal. A soul is a fragment of God. It's a spark of divinity. The sea observes the souls and says, I am more than happy to fulfill this condition. Granted, the sea is created. Now forward the tape recorder of history, 2,448 years. The Jewish people have left Egypt. They come in front of the Red Sea. They're exhausted, vermattet, zerschmettert, zerbrochen. They're broken, they're exhausted. They have been enslaved. They're now running away from the Egyptians. And of course, as the Bible describes, the Torah describes, they attack Moses. Are there not enough graves in Egypt that you had to bring us here to kill us? Now, study that comment in this week's portion. Are there not enough graves in Egypt? How much cynicism, how much frustration is embedded in this comment? There are no graves, there are no cemeteries in Egypt. You needed to place our corpses here in the desert. They gave up. And they got into a major argument. They were protesting. They were rebelling. According to the Talmud, Yerushalmi, and the Midrash, they split up into 4 groups. One group of Jews said, let's surrender. Let's go back to Egypt and become slaves. One group said, let's commit suicide. Let's jump into the water. A third group said, let's declare war. Even if we die, we'll die with grace and honor. And a fourth group said, let's pray. Ultimately, all 4 groups were wrong. Moses said, let's travel, let's journey. It's not a time to pray, it's not a time to fight, it's not a time to kill yourself, and it's not a time to surrender. You have a mission, journey. If the sea has to split, it'll split. But they got into a major argument, a major fight. So you can imagine the scene. There are 3 million Jews. I know how much politics and how many fights there can be in one Jewish community, in one Jewish synagogue, in one Jewish organization, in one Jewish movement. Imagine when you have all Jewish organizations, movements, synagogues, and temples together. Can you imagine what was going on over there? Just think about it. So they're all there. They're bickering with each other. There's tremendous aggravation and conflict for good reason. After all of this, they're now going to end up in the hands of the bloody Egyptians who enslaved them, who murdered their children, and who would now finish them off perhaps, or re-enslave them. And here they're stuck. They're stuck between Egyptians behind them and a sea in front of them. And they're upset. And they begin to argue and fight with each other. Now, imagine the scene. God turns to the sea and says, it's time to part ways. The Jews have to go through. This is the time. You remember I told you one day you have to split. One day you have to create dry land in your midst. The sea tells God, for whom do you want me to part ways? It's for the Jews. The Jews. Where are the Jews? Where are they? God says, you don't have eyes. Take a look. 3 million of them. The sea takes a look and says, it's not the same Jews. The Jews that the sea observed in the chamber of the souls in the beginning of creation were not the same people here. There the sea observed transcendental souls, one with God, in complete communion with the Creator of the world, souls which were saintly, holy, idealistic, selfless, pure. Here, the sea observed, exhausted, conflicted, tumultuous, confused, anguished, tormented Jews. It's not the same. It's not the same Jew. I never made a condition to part ways for them. I made a condition. I agreed to part for the souls in the chamber of souls which I observed then. And the sea refused to part ways until it observed Aroino Shel Yosef. It observed the casket of Joseph. Then it split. Because this was the story of Joseph. This was the story of Yosef. Joseph was a person whom on the surface you did not recognize in him the depth, the conviction, the spirituality of his brothers. When the Torah says in Genesis, Vayaker Yosef es echa v'heim lo hikiru, Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. The Hasidic explanation for that is, Joseph always recognized his brothers, but they never recognized him. They did not see in Joseph who Joseph was internally. They were isolated spiritual shepherds growing up in the cocoon of their father Jacob. Joseph was a kid of the big city. He had grandiose visions in the world of economy, in the world of politics. Joseph used to dress differently than his brothers. Joseph was mesalsel b'sarei. He combed his hair and he dressed beautifully, and his father bought him this colorful tunic. Joseph was a person who dreamt of grandeur and power and leadership. The brothers thought that Joseph was the black sheep of the family. Joseph was the apple that fell far from the tree. Indeed, Joseph would become the prime minister of the greatest empire of ancient civilization. Joseph would speak Egyptian, would dress like an Egyptian, would run the entire economy of the Egyptian empire and save the Fertile Crescent from famine. And nobody knew that inside this Joseph, there was a heart on fire towards morality. Inside this Joseph, there was a soul that was aglow with beauty and spiritual kindness. Inside this soul, there was a Jew, there was a person who was impassioned and an heir of the great golden chain of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. At the surface, you looked at Joseph and you saw perhaps somebody who was secular, who was more assimilated than his brothers, who was very different than his brothers. But if you gaze deep into Joseph's heart, if you knew Joseph from the inside, if you didn't only look at him externally, you could see in Joseph a heart that was imbued and saturated with godliness and holiness and idealism and goodness and resolve to transform the world into the divine abode it ought to become. The moment of truth. The moment of truth emerged that fateful day when Potiphar's wife enters into a home. She feels, what does the 17-year-old slave have to lose if he follows my desires? And what does he have to gain? If he rejects what I want, I will have him tortured, incarcerated for life, losing all freedoms he has. If he follows my desires, he would become a successful person here. Joseph had no family. Joseph had no family influence. Joseph was living in a society and a culture where moral depravity was the norm. And yet, at the moment of truth, Vayonos hachutza, Joseph fled. That's when his inner light emerges in its deepest splendor. Joseph then captures the story of so many people and of so many Jews. On the surface, you look at a person down here, filled with distress and anguish and agony of existence. People can often be stripped from their true nobility, from their authentic calling, from their inner core of holiness. But if you gaze deeper, you see the Yosef HaTzadik, the righteous Joseph, who at a moment of truth flees and rejects everything that Potiphar's wife wants, notwithstanding the glory and honor and reward which he would benefit from following her desire. Rejects it all for the sake of upholding his moral integrity, his fear of God, and his rejection of engaging in an act of simple immorality. The sea didn't want to split. It tells God, these are not the same Jews that I have seen in the beginning of creation. But when the sea observes Joseph, it understands its mistake. Learn from Yosef and you'll understand who's standing in front of you. At the surface, they may be quarreling, they're exhausted, they're tormented, they have been in Egypt for so many years. But deep down, these are the same souls that have been in heaven. So pure and holy and idealistic, it's just here on earth. You have to have the courage, and you have to have the perspective, and you have to have the ability to be able to peer beneath the layers, to be able to excavate their holiness, to be able to excavate their saintliness. My dear sea, Joseph was communicating his subtle and silent message. Don't do to others what you don't like to be done to you. When somebody comes to the ocean or the beach or the sea and says, so there's nothing inside this water? And people say, of course, there's lots inside this water. The sea or the ocean stretches miles deep. I don't see anything. You don't see anything because there's a bed of water that's covering it. But if you have the courage to go down, if you can dive in, you will discover gems, diamonds, coals, minerals, millions of living species, fish, and so forth, beneath the water, inside the water. What you don't like to be done to you, don't do to others, see. So when Hayam Ra, when it observed Joseph, it split. That's the reason that the Talmud compares marriages to the splitting of the sea. You see, before you're born, so you know they announce in heaven who's going to marry who. Bas Ploni LePloni, the daughter of this person, is Bashert for this person. So before you're born, you want to go look at the soul of your Bashert, at your future husband, at your future groom. So God shows you that young man who will one day become your soulmate. And you take a look and you say, wow. For such a guy, anything. For such a guy, I'll split every day. I'll part ways. I'll renounce myself. I will be committed to this person with love, with endless devotion. For such a person, look at this person. Look who I have. That's the moment you see the beauty, the depth that's contained in his soul. Then you're born, and you grow up. 20 years later, 25 years later, 30 years later, 35 years later, or whatever the situation is, you meet the same person. You date, you get engaged, you get married, and now you sometimes have to do Kriyas Yamsov. Now you sometimes have to split your ego a little bit. Now you sometimes have to compromise. You say, I don't want to. What do you mean? You were so impressed with him. It's not the same person, you say. The person I saw there and the person I see here, it's two separate people. Here I see a Shlamazel, a Shlamil, a Nudnik. Here I see a person who has issues, who has problems, who has challenges. And it works the other way as well. Before you're born, you see your soulmate. You see your bride. And you're overwhelmed, you're mesmerized, you're captivated by the inner beauty of this human being. But sometimes in this world, the reality does not match up with the ideal image of this person whom you saw before you were created. Just as the sea had these two Jews, and it could not make peace between them. But of course, what the sea learned from Joseph is that what life is about is discovering the beauty within yourself and within another person in this world. Understanding that your spouse may have two faces, but the two faces are really one. Understanding that every human being may have two faces, but the two faces are really one. The Jewish people may have two faces, but the two faces are really one. Yes, there is a beautiful, spiritual, celestial, heavenly face, and there is a face that is tarnished by the gravel of earth. But the same face is really here on earth too. You just have to have the courage and the love and the commitment and the dedication to look beyond, to penetrate, to excavate the inner face, to be able to see that face here and to understand that everybody struggles in this world. Life is a struggle. The soul struggles. Our personalities struggle. People are confronted with many challenges, and it's difficult for us to excavate that level of depth. Therefore, the Talmud says, you want a good marriage, you have to be able to remember the story of Kriyas Yamsuf. You have to be able to remember the story of the splitting of the sea. You have to be able to have that serenity, that clarity, to look beneath. That's the Basi Legani Achoisi Kala. Just as there are two perspectives on the world, there are two perspectives on every single human being. There are two perspectives on every single Jew. There is his side of the family and her side of the family. Either you come from Adam and Eve, who were created by God, or you ultimately come from bacteria. How inspired, how saintly, how pure can bacteria be? This is a choice. It's a choice. It's two perspectives. And the final message of the Rebbe on the 10th of Shvat, and the message that his son-in-law, the Rebbe, continued to teach and to personify and to embody, was to be able to unite the two faces, to be able to look at the world, to be able to look at yourself, to be able to look at another Jew and another human being and celebrate the divine orchard embedded within them. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Hinei matoi
L'chaim, I want to welcome all of our new additions, the many who are joining us here from all over the world, communities and individuals, in your centers, in your shuls, in your homes. L'chaim, l'chaim, this evening of study, song, and inspiration is dedicated to Levi Yitzchak ben Cyril. May God grant him a refuah shlema, a complete and a very speedy recovery, bekara very speedily. Amen. Kein yehi Yartzeit. And I'm going to ask all of you to say a l'chaim and a prayer for him among Kol Choli Yisrael, among all of the ill of our people, that God grant him and all of them a complete and speedy recovery. Amen. L'chaim, l'chaim. There's a story, an episode I heard a number of years ago which illustrates a very central theme connected to this evening and really reflective of the theme we have been developing earlier this evening. The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, had a custom each year, the day before Yom Kippur, on the eve of Yom Kippur, in the afternoon, he would distribute honey cake, lekach, for all those who wish to come and get a piece of cake. Bless them with a shana toivom sukkah, with a good and sweet year. And for those who remember the scene, the line would extend down Eastern Parkway, usually till Brooklyn Avenue, would go up Brooklyn Avenue. And this was the day before Yom Kippur, Tovshin Mem, 1979. There was an individual Jew, a Hasidic Jew, who decided to come and get a piece of cake and blessing from the Lubavitcher Rebbe on this eve of Yom Kippur. This Jew was a Hasidic Jew from the group known as Satmar. He was a Satmar Chassid. He lived in Williamsburg. And you know, over the years, especially during that time, there were some profound ideological differences between Chabad Lubavitch and Satmar, particularly in the issue of how to approach secular Jews, how to deal with secular Jews, whether to have relationships with secular Jews, and so on and so forth. There were some very serious ideological differences between these two groups. In 1979, in the summer, on the 26th of Av, the famous Rebbe of Satmar, Rabbi YY Jacobson, of blessed memory, passed away. It took a year and a half till the movement appointed his nephew as his successor, Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum, who passed away a few years ago. In between, in the interim between his passing and the appointment of his nephew, there was no Rebbe, there was no leader in Satmar. This Satmar Jew wanted to receive a blessing from a tzaddik for the new year, for the high holidays. So he made the trip to Crown Heights and got online to go to the Rebbe's room in 770 Eastern Parkway and receive his honey cake and blessing. Murphy's Law, Mazel, or what the Baal Shem Tov would call divine providence. Who's standing in front of him? In front of him is standing not only a secular Jew, but a hippie. And not just a hippie, but what you might call a Mahadrin, Mina Mahadrin hippie, which means a truly authentic hippie, following all of the customs and traditions and rituals of the hippies. May we say that his hair extended quite long, and his general look was one to which the Satmar Chassid of Williamsburg was extremely unaccustomed to. They engage in a conversation And when he realizes that this secular hippie is also going to the Rebbe, just as he's going to the Rebbe, he becomes really turned off, thinking to himself, if that man is your Rebbe, he can't be my Rebbe. How can you and me, how can we be in the same boat? How can we be included in the same group, in the same category? He's looking at this person and he's disgusted, literally. From his perspective, he is disgusted with Chabad, with Lubavitcher. He's an ultra orthodox, religious, Hasidic Jew. And here is a Jew from a very different world, and a very different perspective, and a totally opposite Weltanschauung. Are these the products of Chabad? Are these the students of the Lubavitcher Rebbe? Are these the people he's proud of? This is what he has to show. This is what all their outreach is about. Feh. He regrets coming. And yet, he's there already. He wants a blessing. Even if this person can't give him a blessing, certainly won't hurt him, won't harm him. And I guess a good piece of honey cake is always nice to have. So he stays online. It's a long line. It took time. Well, finally, his turn comes. In front of him is this secular Jew, the hippie. The Rebbe gives this Jew, the secular Jew, a piece of honey cake. With a luminescent face, a radiant face, he blesses him for the new year. And then he gives a piece of cake to this Hasidic Jew from Satmar, and he blesses him for the new year. And this man begins moving away to go home, to leave and go home. But the Rebbe calls him back. And the Rebbe asks him in Yiddish, Du bist a Satmar, a Chassid? Are you a Chassid of Satmar? Yeah, I am. Yismach Moshe learns to. Do you learn the book Yismach Moshe? For the benefit of those who don't know what the book is, I'll explain. Yismach Moshe is a commentary on the Torah that was authored by a man named Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum. He was the rabbi of Uhel in Hungary, and he is considered the founding father of the dynasty of Satmar. The Yismach Moshe, his book is called Yismach Moshe. Let Moses rejoice, because the author's name was Moshe, Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum. And this is a classic work which is studied in the Satmar movement continuously, like Tanya is studied in Chabad. So the Rebbe asks this Jew, you're a Satmar, a Chassid? Are you a follower of Satmar? Yes. Yismach Moshe, you study? Yes, I study Yismach Moshe. Do you remember the story that the Yismach Moshe presents in his introduction to his commentary on Tehillim? He has a book on Psalms. It's called Tehillah LaMoshe. And in the introduction, he writes a story. Do you remember that story? The Jew remembered the story. So the Rebbe needed only to remind him the story, the end of the story. Let me tell you the story. The story that Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum transcribes in that book goes like this. There was a Jew, a man by the name of Rebbe Yitzchak, who passed away and came to heaven. Who welcomes him in heaven? None other than Rashi. Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, the great biblical commentator, the well-known Jew from France, Germany, Rabbon Shal Yisrael, the rabbi of all of Israel, the teacher of all of Israel. Rashi comes to greet Rabbi Yitzchak. And when Rabbi Yitzchak asks Rashi, why this honor? He says, it's for your son, who was still alive. He had a son whose name was Rabbi Yechiel Michal of Zlotchev. He's known as Reb Michal Zlotchever. He was a student of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. He was a very great Jew, a great man. His name was Reb Michal Zlotchever. And his father passed away, Rabbi Yitzchak, and Rashi comes to greet his father in heaven for the honor of his son, Reb Michal Zlotchever. And Rashi says, there is something about your son that I am eager to discover. Your son's service of God generates a tremendous commotion in heaven. Your son's service of the Almighty causes tremendous positive energy in heaven. God has nachas and He quells from your son's work like nobody else. And I want to know what is unique about your son's service of God. What makes him special? What sets him apart? So Rabbi Yitzchak says, my son sits and studies Torah at every possible moment. Day and night he studies Torah. Rashi says, that's extraordinary. But there are other Jews who are completely immersed in the study of Torah, and yet I don't see that their behaviors and their life generates such powerful delight in God's heart. There must be something additional to that. So he describes his son's prayers. His prayers are done with every fiber of his being. He almost expires in prayer. That's how deeply connected he becomes during prayer. And here again, Rashi says, I know of a few others. And then he discusses his son's tremendous discipline when it comes to the material world. He fasts. He shuns material pleasures. And here again, Rashi says there are others. So he talks about his son's charitable works. His son, Reb Lubavitcher, would raise money for widows and for orphans and for people in need. And Rashi says it's true that charity is the greatest mitzvah. To help a person in need is the greatest mitzvah. And there's no question that that creates such a powerful, beautiful commotion in heaven. But there are some other Jews who are also dedicated heart and soul to charity, to philanthropy, to tzedakah. And I still see that there's something your son is involved in that causes God infinite pleasure and gratification and nachas, and I want to know what it is. Finally, Rabbi Yitzchak tells Rashi, there's one more thing about my son. One more thing. And he quotes 3 words from the prophet Malachi to describe his son. V'rabim heishiv me'avain. Meaning, he brought back many people from a life of iniquity. Reb Lubavitcher was involved in kindling sparks and in bringing back many people who have been lost morally and spiritually to their source, giving them their deserved place of dignity within Knesset Yisrael, within the Jewish people. This my son does. When Rashi heard this, he calmed down. He got an answer to his question. He relaxed. This he accepted. The Rebbe turns to this person, to this Satmar Chassid standing there online, and communicates to him this message. I don't know the story verbatim, but I know the content. If Rashi calmed down, you can also calm down. If Rashi relaxed, you can also relax. And he wished him a good and sweet year, and this person went on. He related a story a few years ago and said, what moved him was not only the fact that the Rebbe apparently felt what he was feeling for 45 minutes, the resentment, the grudge, the negative energy, the judgmentalism. But what touched him even more and what was so novel for him was the perspective. A perspective he wasn't raised with, a perspective he was not nurtured with, a perspective he could not even appreciate from his own upbringing and background. The perspective that the greatest or one of the greatest things you can do in life is v'rabim heishiv me'avin, to expand the bosom of the Jewish people and embrace every individual human being, whoever he or she is, wherever he or she is, and allow them to resume their place and to restore them to their righteous place within the divine symphony of Jewish history, of the Jewish people, of the Torah of Israel, of the God of Israel, and of the people of Israel, to allow them to come back to their home, to their roots, to their source, to their own core, to their soul, to find God once again. I heard the story, and then something struck me. If you ever went to visit the resting place of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose Yartzeit we commemorate tonight, the 10th of Shevat. Tonight is the 59th Yartzeit. There is a tombstone. The tombstone is very brief. I am not sure who wrote the text back in 1950. I assume it was his son-in-law, the Rebbe. There are very few titles on the tombstone engraved about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. One of them is a line from the prophet Malachi, V'rabim heishiv me'avon. He brought back many people from iniquity, from being lost, from being astray. And I used to wonder, why was this title chosen? One can say many, many, many things about the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. He lived a life of endless sacrifice for the Jewish people and for Judaism. Volumes would not capture the enormous, Mesiras Nefesh sacrifice that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe had, not just for his Hasidim, for his own pupils, but for the entire Jewish world. And in the most difficult and darkest of times. But from all the titles that could have been chosen, this one was chosen, V'rabim heishiv me'avon. And that's the reason, if you look at the left to that tombstone, on the tombstone of his son-in-law, of the Rebbe's resting place, they put the same three words, V'rabim heishiv me'avon. I assume because they were engraved on the tombstone of his father-in-law, of the previous Rebbe. Perhaps this story can shed some light on this question. And yet, the message is clear. Basi legani achaisi kala. We look at ourselves, we look at other people, and sometimes we can develop a sense of judgmentalism, a sense of negative energy as we lose touch with the truth. And the truth is that the soul, with all of its purity and holiness, is present in each and every person and in each and every Jew. And our challenge is to be able to see it, observe it, connect with it, appreciate it, honor it, love it, and embrace it. If you see it in them, they'll be able to see it in themselves. And thus, the previous Rebbe and his son-in-law, the Rebbe, in many ways, their life story can be captured by these three words, V'rabim heishiv me'avon. Never believing that there's anybody you could give up on, that there's anybody you should give up on. Because deep down, our job, our role, our mission is to reveal within ourselves and with every person we come in contact with, that core soul. May we have the courage, the inspiration, and the clarity to be able to look at ourselves and to look at others in that light. L'chaim, l'chaim. this approach that we have been developing and discussing is extremely relevant in the area of education as well. A rabbi, shared with me the following story that he experienced. Parents came to see him about their child. But before I tell you this story, I want to tell you an anecdote. They tell the story about the two brothers who were classical troublemakers. They terrorized their entire home, family, community. Whenever anything went wrong, they were the ones to blame, naturally. Intuitively, you knew these two kids, Yankel and Shmedel, they were the ones who made the fire, who broke it, who destroyed it. It was all their fault. Their mother, their poor mother, didn't know, was tutman, what do we do with these kids? So one day, a great rabbi was coming to town. She decided she's going to bring each of the children separately to the rabbi in order to have him perhaps inspire them or lift them up or transform them or refine them. Okay, brother number one, Yankel, comes to the rabbi, enters into his office, and the rabbi looks at him and says, "Tell me, Yankel, wo is God? Where is God?" The boy does not respond. The rabbi asks again, "Where is God?" He doesn't answer. A third time, a fourth time, "Where is God? Tell me where God is." The boy picks himself up and runs out of the office, runs out of the home, runs the 7 blocks to his own house, the fastest pace that he can. He enters into his house. He comes to his brother's room. He locks the door. He's completely out of breath. And he says, "My brother Shmedel, you won't believe what happened now. God is missing, and they think that we did it." So this rabbi tells me about parents who come to see him because of problems they're having with their child. Their child is 10 years old or 11 or 12 and is misbehaving. And the main problem is they're discovering in him a proclivity to lie and to steal. So they come to ask his advice. What should they do? The mother had to go out for a moment, so she excused herself. And when the father was there alone with the rabbi, the father tells him, I just want to tell you that I always knew this about the kid. When this boy was 3 years old, 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, I already knew that he's a ganav, he's a thief. I knew that he's a shakran, he's a liar. I knew that he's a little terrorist. I knew it. I always said it about him. I saw it in him. So the rabbi is looking at him, and the father says, I didn't want to say it in front of my wife to aggravate her, but this is the truth. I knew this from day one. The rabbi responded to him very wisely. He said, I then really don't understand why you're so disappointed. You're sitting here, you're crying to me. Why are you disappointed? Your son lived up to your expectations impeccably. You expected this from him, and this is what became of him. It is a true observation because what we see in our children is what ultimately they can see in themselves. And what we see in our students is what they can see in themselves. If you look at your student, you look at your child, and you see the negative qualities, you see the flaws, you see the challenges, you see the problems, you see the bad behavior, you see the negative or destructive patterns, you see it, you emphasize it, you accentuate it, you're pained by it, and that's what you see in this person. Often, chances are that they will live up to those expectations. They will live up to the image you projected onto them. What you believe about them, they will come to believe about themselves. But if you look at your child, you look at your student, and you see a diamond, and you love this diamond, but you understand that the diamond has to be polished. The diamond has to be cleaned. The diamond has to be developed. The diamond has to be refined. The diamond has to be cultivated until it becomes the diamond it's capable of becoming. Then the child and the student will see that quality in themselves as well. Basi Lagani, if you look at an orchard, if you see your child as an orchard, as a gan, as a garden, capable of producing the most beautiful and exquisite aromas, he or she will be able to see that within themselves. But this is critical not just in homes and in education, also in schools, in our educational systems. Teachers, principals, educators, mentors, parents, rabbis must be able to look at their children, to look at the students, and to see diamonds. If you immediately develop a negative attitude, if you put them down, they will put themselves down. I want to tell you a story. There is an educator in Israel. His name is Rabbi Tzvi Greenwald. He's a very warm person. Tzvi Greenwald, a very warm individual. He once visited the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And during their audience, he posed the following question to the Rebbe. He said, my style in education is that I display tremendous warmth to my students. I embrace them. I hug them. I shower them with passion and love. And there were a few individuals who told me that I'm making a mistake. I'm far too mushy. I'm far too warm. I'm far too embracing. I'm far too loving. Good education requires distance. Be harsh. Be colder. Be aloof. Be sublime. Don't be so warm. Don't let them use you and manipulate you that way. And I'm asking the Rebbe advice. Is my approach flawed? Is my approach erroneous? Should I cease to do things the way I have been doing them till now and develop a different approach? Become more harsh? And he said, when the Rebbe heard this question, his face grew very serious. He was sitting on his chair in his room. He lifted himself up from his chair because of his emotion. And he said, Chas v'shalom, God forbid. Du wirst doch aufbauen am Mechitze shel Barzel zwischen dir mit den Talmidim. If you follow this approach, you will construct an iron curtain, an iron partition between you and your students. But then he added what I think is a very contemporary psychological observation. He said this: I want to tell you something about these students. In today's day, many of them are extremely self-critical. They put themselves down better than anybody puts them down. If your approach is one of criticism, if you further denigrate them, if you further belittle them, if you further put them down, you will not be telling them anything new. You will just confirm what they already believe about themselves, that they're worthless. What they need from you is for you to tell them how great they are and how great they can become. That's what they need from you. As much as you denigrate them, you're not accomplishing anything. They know that. They know it better than you. And what this really means is, it's a very telling, I think, observation about so many people today who put themselves down in a very profound place. They don't believe in themselves. They don't love themselves. They don't trust themselves. And therefore, they don't care for themselves. Your job as an educator, your job as a parent is to see the garden. V'rabim heishiv meyavin. Not to be naive, not to ignore flaws, not to deny challenges, not to repress problems, not at all, to be aware and mindful of the challenges, but to help the person, give them the tools to be able to celebrate themselves, celebrate their soul, celebrate their life, celebrate their choices, and become the people they're capable of becoming. This is what Yosef represented. This is what Joseph represented. He had that power that was given to him by his father, and therefore at a moment of great challenge, he can withstand the challenge. Vayonos vayetze hachutza. He fled. And this is what inspired the sea at that fateful moment to part its ways for Joseph. Joseph was only 17 years old, but he had a father. He had a father who always taught him to remember what he's capable of becoming, who he really is. And in that challenging moment, it proved to save his life and his future. L'chaim, l'chaim. L'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim to life, l'chaim to health, l'chaim to happiness, l'chaim to redemption. Welcome all those of you who have now joined us in the midst of our evening of song, study, and inspiration, commemorating the Yartzeit of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the day that the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, assumed the leadership of Chabad Lubavitch on the 10th of Shevat, 1950. We're gathered here this evening with individuals and communities literally across the entire globe. And I want to welcome all of you individually and collectively. I know many communities and families are watching this together in their homes or in their shuls or in their Chabad houses or in other places of assembly. Bruchim habayim, welcome all of you who are here with us. Please say l'chaim with us, join us. I want to mention that this event, this Farbrengen, this gathering this evening is dedicated especially to our dear colleague, Rebbe Yitzchak ben Cyril. May God grant him a complete and speedy recovery. Amen. Ken Yehi Yartzeit. And this should be b'toich kol chayli Yisrael, among all of our brothers and sisters who are in need of a refuah shlema, in need of a recovery. I also want to mention that these classes here on the web and these Farbrengens began in the merit of Chana Bas Rasha Zelda, who has since passed on, and may this also be La'elu HaNeshama Shalah, for her soul, may it rest in peace. Tehenish Masat Tzrura, B'tzrer HaChayim, Chana Bas Rasha Zelda, and Bas Reb Aaron Leib of blessed memory, Zechroina Livracha. We will now continue and sing a beautiful Hasidic melody known as a niggin, a song for Shabbos and Yom Tov, as we are joined by internationally renowned cantor Beryl Zucker and a Hasidic choir. does one in a challenging world, in a world of recession, of financial crises, in a world when many individuals who just a few months ago were on top of their game, life was successful, rewarding, they commanded tremendous respect, tremendous honor. Their lifestyle was extravagant, and they can afford it, thank God. Some of them gave enormous amounts of charity. And in a few months, so many of them lost enormous amounts of money. In such a world, with many other challenges, besides the economic and financial challenges, there are the psychological and emotional challenges of life. There is a world threatened by terror on a daily basis. Our brothers and sisters in Israel, after weeks in Gaza, still face an enemy on the north, and an enemy on the south, and an enemy on the east. On the west, you have the Mediterranean, and then ultimately the United States of America. And with all of this combined together, it's often hard for us to maintain our equilibrium, never mind to be empowered and inspired. And here, the discourse maintains Basi Legani, that we still have to be able to look and see the flowers, smell the flowers, say thank you, celebrate the world as a garden. Basi Legani Achaisi Kala. Once at a Shabbos gathering of this week's portion of Beshalach, the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, addressed the scene at the end of the portion. Amalek declares war against the fresh Jewish people who have just left Egypt. It's a war that was not a response to any provocation. Nobody provoked him. It was totally unprovoked. Amalek came and declared war on the Jews. Moses tells Joshua, "Tzei hilachim ba'Amalek." Choose men and go fight Amalek. But he himself does not engage in the fight against Amalek. Instead, Moses goes up to pray. When Moses lifts up his hand in prayer, he lifts up his arms in prayer, V'gava Yisrael. Israel is strong. Israel prevails. And when Moses' hands are not uplifted, when they go down, Israel is weakened. At the end, Joshua is successful. Amalek is defeated. The Jews survive. But this is the only war in the 5 books of Moses where there's this interesting arrangement. The leader goes up to pray. Joshua actually engages in the war. What is the symbolism of this? What is the significance of this? Every war requires prayer and requires action. If you just sit at home and pray, the war will not be able to get done. Somebody has to be on the front. Somebody is in the front lines. There is the infantry who goes in to take down the enemy which wants to murder you and your children. And then there are those who pray. Every war requires both. But in this war, the connection was extremely blatant and conspicuous. Moses says, you go fight, I'm going to go and lift up my hands. And at some point he becomes tired. And his brother and his nephew have to hold up his arms, hold him up so that he should not cease to pray. And the Rebbe explained, one of the explanations in this is, Amalek represents not just a physical nation which came to terrorize the Jewish people, Amalek also represents a trend, a philosophy, a culture. And it's the trend of cynicism coming from coldness and apathy. Amalek is defined in the Bible, in the Torah, Asher Karcha Baderech, in the book of Deuteronomy. And one of the explanations brought in the Midrash and Tanchumen and Rashi is, there was a hot bath, and everybody was scared to enter into the bath. And Amalek was determined to cool off the bath. Amalek is the expert cynic who knows how to turn every situation around and cool off people from any passion, from any excitement. Cynicism is really a form of depression. Often, unhealthy cynicism comes when people are incapable of dealing with life. They make fun of everything. They scoff at everybody, at everything, and at everything. It's a way of resigning to the evil of the world by just becoming endlessly cynical. There is no sincerity left because you don't believe there's anything to be sincere about. Cynicism erodes conviction. It erodes love. It erodes community. It erodes resolve. It erodes productive growth. And Amalek is therefore a continuous, perpetual enemy from within. And Amalek, the antidote to Amalek is prayer. And that's the story. Moses says, you will not be able to fight Amalek without davening, without prayer. Prayer is the time in the day when the person goes into himself or herself and finds their soul, finds their innocence, finds their optimism, finds their confidence. If you don't have those few moments in your morning, when you encounter your true depth, when you go and face the world, the first challenge can take you down, or at least turn you extremely cold and cynical. So Moses says, lift up your arms in prayer, because when you're facing a world and when you're facing daily challenges that can cut you down emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, morally, individually, and collectively, we desperately need prayer. We desperately need those few powerful moments or minutes when we retreat into private oases of our neshama, of our souls, and we connect. We connect with God. We connect with our core. We connect with the garden within us, with the orchard within us, so that we can then identify the garden within every person we come into contact that day, and the garden in the world. That's the element of prayer. And then there is the partner of prayer, which is study, which is learning. The Baal Shem Tov says there's a flood. The flood is going to drown the whole universe. So the Baal Shem Tov says, God tells Noach, Bo el ha-teva, enter into the ark. Teva doesn't only mean ark. Teva in Hebrew means word. Enter into the word. What does it mean to enter into the word? These are the words of prayer and study. I can say the words, but I don't enter into the words. I am not in the word. The words are just being said. I'm doing lip service. It's an external experience. I'm not there. I'm saying the words. I may attend a class. I may read a book. I may go to prayers. I may daven. But I didn't go into the word. I am not present. It's robotic. It's monotonous. There's no experience. That's one of the great crises Judaism has today. Many people are doing lots of good things. There's a lot of Torah being learned and a lot of prayers being said and a lot of mitzvahs being performed. But very often what's missing is the experience of it. Our children or ourselves are not experiencing Judaism. Prayer is not an experience. Nothing happens to you during prayer. And learning is not an experience. Nothing happens to me during learning. I don't allow myself to go into the Word. The Baal Shem Tov says when there's a flood in the world, when the world is being flooded, and you want to remain afloat, boya lateva, go into the words. Go into the words of prayer. Go into the words of study. Because prayer and study are the islands, they are the arcs, they are the tavis, where you can have a world flooded by lots of challenges, but within that arc, within that word, you're not only surviving, you're thriving because you connect to a place that's unbreakable. You connect to a place where there are no breaches. You connect to a source of comfort and strength that nothing and nobody can take away. And that's why, as we focus tonight on the significance of this night of the 10th of Shevat, and Basi Lagani coming to the garden, I believe it's extremely appropriate to challenge ourselves and rededicate ourselves, thank you, to the art of prayer and to the art of study. Not just as robotic, external, superficial acts of lip service, but as authentic daily commitments and experiences. People who dedicate time to daven, to connect to God in a sincere way every day. And people who dedicate time to learn, to become submerged in Torah, studying Torah on a daily basis, are capable of experiencing a serenity, a clarity, a wholesomeness, especially in today's world, that's unparalleled. Because if you're not connected to the source of inspiration, it's very easy to lose that inspiration. And this is one of the reasons, and here I extend an invitation to all of you who are here physically and to all of you who are here virtually, to come join us here on the web on a weekly basis, and we will continue to grow and expand the classes and the learning experiences and opportunities for yourselves, for your friends, for your loved ones, for your children, until the world is filled with Torah. The world is saturated with Torah. So then when we go out from the ark, we go out of the word, we can bring the inspiration and power of Torah and the perspective of Torah to ourselves, to our communities, and to the entire world. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Yeah.
The original discourse that the previous Rebbe published for the day which ultimately was the day he passed away, the 10th of Shvat 1950, contains 20 chapters. For that day, he published the first 5. The second 5 he gave to be published 3 days later for the Yartzeit of his mother on the 13th of Shvat. The next 5 for Purim, and the last 5 for the 2nd of Nisan, which was the Yartzeit, which is the Yartzeit of his father, the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Ber Schneerson, the Rebbe Rashab. Therefore, it is a custom among Chabad Hasidim that each year, when they study this discourse on the Yartzeit of the previous Rebbe, the 10th of Shvat, they focus on another chapter. The first year, 1951, the first Yartzeit, they focused on chapter 1. 1969, chapter 19. 1970, they finished the first cycle, 20 chapters. And 1971, they resumed again the cycle. And the Rebbe, the successor of his father-in-law, each year at the Yud Shevat gathering would give a discourse, Basi Lagani, and would focus on one chapter of the 20 chapters of the discourse, explaining it, elaborating on it, and revealing new layers of depth in that particular chapter. Today, we're in the midst of the third cycle. And this year, 2009-5769, we study chapter 19, actually the second to the last chapter of this long discourse of Basi Lagani, which, as I discussed in the beginning of the evening, was the discourse the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, published for the Yartzeit of his grandmother for the 10th of Shvat, 1950, ultimately the day when he would pass away. One of the points that the Rebbe makes in this 19th chapter is a concept known in Hebrew as bizbuz ha'otzros, the squandering of the treasures, explaining that often a king amasses enormous amounts of priceless treasures that have been given to him from earlier generations. Sometimes for hundreds of years, the king's treasury contains priceless treasures that one can't even estimate. They have been there for generations. He barely ever shows it to anybody. Maybe at the wedding of a child. Maybe when the best friend comes to visit him. And even then, he will not show everything, and certainly not squander it and give it up. There is an exception. At a time of war. At a time of war, when the king is engaged in a war for his very life, for his very empire, for his very country, at such a time, the king will enter into his treasury and take out every single priceless gem that is there and use it for the sake of victory. Explaining that victory is one of the deepest drives in the human soul. It is one of the most essential qualities in the human soul, the need to win. When confronting an enemy, any type of enemy, the need to win, it brings out what's called midas hanetzach, the quality of victory, in the deepest place. And the Rebbe uses this as a metaphor to describe the war of the Jewish people, defined as the army of God, to bring goodness to the world, to saturate the world with godliness, that for this war, for this battle, God would gives them the deepest treasures that are usually not exposed. The highest, deepest levels, the most intimate aspects of God himself are given to the soldiers on the front. He may give them through the generals and commanders, but the objective is the infantry, the soldiers on the front who actually carry out the battle and bring victory. These are the ordinary human beings who wake up each morning and battle. They battle the evil within themselves. They battle the narcissism and the selfishness within themselves, and they battle the evil and the negativity within the world around them. And at a time of war, the king is ready to squander all of these treasures. It has been suggested that this concept perhaps can be explained a bit clearer by a fascinating story that's recorded in the Midrash. One of the mysteries of Jewish history is King David builds Jerusalem. King David is a great warrior. King David reunites the land and the Jewish kingdom. King David amasses all of the wealth to build a temple, to build a Beit HaMikdash, a permanent structure for God in Jerusalem. But he never ends up doing it. Why not? He has the blueprints, he writes the plans, he has all the material, the merchandise and the money prepared, but he does not end up doing it. He says clearly in the book of Chronicles 1, chapter 22, Vani ba'ani, me in my poverty, hachinoisi lebeis Hashem, I prepared for God's house. Kikrim meya elef v'kesef elef alofim kikrim l'nechoshes l'barzel ein mishkal. Enormous quantities of gold and of silver and endless quantities of copper and iron. But he never ended up building the temple. His son, Shlomo, Solomon, would build the temple. Why? There's a midrash, Yalkut Shimoni in Rus, in the book of Rus. The book of Ruth gives us this explanation. David says, in my poverty, I prepared for the house of God all of this wealth. What does he mean by in my poverty? If he was so poor, how did he amass so much wealth? It's like the teacher who once said, if I would be Rothschild, I would be richer than Rothschild. Why? Because I wouldn't stop teaching. So in addition to Rothschild's money, I would also have the money I get from teaching. David calls himself poor, and yet he has so much wealth. So the Midrash in Yalkut Shimoni says this: the day that David killed Goliath, he shlichu olav b'nois Yisrael kol ha'kesev ha'azov. Jewish women, Jewish girls, to pay tribute to David's extraordinary victory, ridding the world and the Jews from Goliath, from the giant Goliath. They threw all of their gold and silver on David. He took all of the money and he donated it and put it aside to build one day a Beis HaMikdash, to build one day a home for God on the mountaintop in Jerusalem. This was still the time of King Saul. David was not the king. Years would pass, and this treasure would grow and grow. And it was an enormous treasure. And the Midrash says it came from the money, from the silver and gold that the girls hurled upon David after he killed Goliath. In the midst of David's kingdom, there was a hunger. 3 years in the Holy Land. A terrible famine. The Jewish people came to David and said, you have stored away so much gold and silver from the days of Goliath. Give it to us. Let us feed the hungry. David did not want to. He refused. He said, this money is dedicated, it's consecrated to build God's home. I'm not going to take this money and use it for the present famine. Let's find other solutions for the famine. Interestingly, Rabbi YY Jacobson, in his book, Yaris Dvash, Drush Beis, connects this medrash to the famous Gemara in Brachas, where David advised the sages to go to war in order to provide for the welfare and the food, for the welfare and nutrition of the Jewish people. And he says because he didn't want to give this money. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God told him, lo kibalta alecha lahachyes by nefashos chayecha she'ein hamikdash nivna al yadcha. Since you did not take this money and use it to vitalize souls, I swear to you, the temple will not be built through you. It would be built through Solomon. And Rabbi YY Jacobson explains that this is the meaning of the prophet who tells King David, why didn't David build the temple? Because you spilled much blood because of all of your wars. Rabbi Yonason says it's not the wars he fought for survival of the Jewish people and for the land of Israel. You can't blame him for those wars. It's the wars that were fought in order to provide for their economy, because he didn't want to use this money. And that's how Rabbi Yonason Eibschitz explains this medrash. Let's reflect on this. Why didn't King David want to use the money for the famine? Why didn't he want to use it to build the economy, to stop the recession? Why didn't he want to put it into the market to be able to feed people who didn't have jobs? Apparently, what King David thought was, you can't allow the pressures and the crises of the moment to interfere and overwhelm your global grand vision, which is relevant for eternity. The famine is bad, it's destructive, it's horrible, but it's a momentary crisis. We need to find a way out of it. How can I allow the great dream of Israel, the great vision of after hundreds of years of God being homeless, as King David writes in the book of Psalms, how can I go to sleep when God doesn't have a home? After hundreds of years of being in building one tabernacle and another tabernacle and another tabernacle in Nov and in Givon and in Shiloh, David feels he cannot go to sleep, he cannot rest if God doesn't have a permanent home. The Beis HaMikdash, the Holy of Holies. So he's now going to squander the dream of eternity, to turn the world into a home for God. The Beit HaMikdash was the place where God would dwell. This is where the divine presence would be manifested. This is where the world would become the garden. Basi Lagani Achaisi Kala. This would be the garden. Can he really squander that dream and just take all of the money and put it into the market and get people jobs and give them money and give them charity and get bread on the table and milk on the table and nutrition on the table? What about the great dream? And therefore he decides you cannot substitute the holy for the mundane. You cannot forego the eternity for the moment. You cannot. And yet he made a mistake. Relative to his level, it was an error. God says, the temple cannot be built through you. This approach demonstrates to me that you're not worthy of building the Beis HaMikdash, of bringing history to a new level. You got all of these treasures for your personal victory. You dedicated all to God. David could have said, I killed Goliath. These girls want to honor me. Let me go home and start building my own bank account and my own portfolio. He does not do that. He consecrates it to God, but God says, since you didn't want to use it to feed Jews in the 3 years of hunger, you cannot build the temple. King Solomon will use it to build the temple. One of the possible explanations in this is that God is communicating to David what Jewish redemption is all about. There is no real redemption if it doesn't relate to the problems of individual people in this very moment. The power of redemption is that it liberates the whole world and all of humanity, including small people and ordinary people. If small people who suffer from day-to-day problems are a burden to you, if you cannot deal with their issues, with their needs, because you have a grandiose vision of changing the world, then you cannot be their redeemer. David, God says, you were responsible to allow your dream to crumble. Not to crumble and be destroyed, but to crumble and be fed to small people who need crumbs. Somebody who is not ready to take the treasures and give them to the people who often need ordinary things does not appreciate the true meaning of redemption, which is redeeming the world, the physical world, and creating this redemption through physical, ordinary beings, through their ordinary lives. If you want to bring redemption, you have to know these people are your soldiers. The only way you will be successful is if you believe in them. If you feel that they are very far from your vision, If you feel that their needs are not your needs, you live in a world of a temple, you live in a world of God, you live in heaven, you're giving all your money for an eternal dream, and here they're coming and nudging you for bread and milk, and you look at them and you say, how do you compare your two dreams? I'm thinking and dreaming about a Beit HaMikdash, about a temple, and you're focused on your own physical needs. God says there is an issue here. There is a problem here. Ultimately, the temple is built through these people and within their hearts. You must believe in them. You must nurture them. You must invest in them. You must give them your treasures. You must empower them. You must believe in the people of your generation. Perhaps, if David would have sacrificed his dream, he can inspire them to sacrifice their dream. If he would have sacrificed his dream and given them the treasures, they would see the pain, the anguish that he endured from getting rid of these treasures, from saying goodbye to these treasures. And they would then be able to reciprocate and renounce their smaller dreams for the sake of his dream. They would be able to become sensitive to what David really felt, just as he was being sensitive to what they felt. But if he was not ready to renounce himself, to renounce his treasures, to renounce his vision for them, a gulf remains between the two. And in that gulf, they have a difficult time experiencing who David is, and ultimately the temple cannot be rebuilt. This perhaps is one of the elements contained in the idea of the king squandering the treasures during a time of war. David did not squander the treasures. He didn't want to. They're too precious. Who am I going to be giving them to? For what will I be using them? And yet, here the Rebbe explains, the previous Rebbe explains in chapter 19, if you want victory, you need Sivois Hashem. You need your soldiers. You need your people. You need to invest your faith and your passion and your idealism in them. And it's only if you give them everything, you give them all of your treasures, you squander everything, there's nothing left, and they see what you have invested in them, then they can respond, they will reciprocate, and they will be able to give you their hearts, their commitment, and build a temple, build a Beis HaMikdash, construct a world. I think it is fair to say that this, the Jewish world has seen throughout his years of leadership in the Rebbe, who took these words of his father-in-law very seriously. The Rebbe contained this very powerful paradox. On one hand, he was the opposite. He was completely aloof from the materialistic world and pleasures that so many of us are connected to. A very private, segregated, sublime individual. A godly person, a holy person, a pure person. Dreamt of a Beis HaMikdash, dreamt of building a Beis HaMikdash, of building the divine presence in this world, of creating a world in which redemption can materialize, in which a fragment of heaven can be built on planet Earth. But he was the leader of a people. And the people don't always dream of building temples, of creating heaven on earth. The people often dream of paying mortgages, of making a living, of buying a home, of selling a home, of taking care of themselves. Especially in a post-Holocaust era, where American Jewry were just trying to get themselves together and start life over again. One of the easiest things for the Rebbe would have been to detach, to give up a little bit, not on his dream, but on people who don't identify with the dream, on people who just want to take care of their day-to-day lives. They're hungry. They want to go on vacation. They want a nap on Shabbos afternoon. They want shalom. What's wrong with having shalom? A guy told me he went on vacation the other day to a hotel. There were a lot of Jews there, and he sees Friday afternoon there's a room, and on the door there's a sign, the Toyameha Zimmer, the Toyameha room. Toyameha room meant the room of tasting. He walks into the room and he sees a smorgasbord. All the food that would be served on Shabbos, they served Friday afternoon for everybody to taste. And he says the meal in that room, the amount of food in that room was more than the amount of food they had the whole Shabbos. The Jew says, I want tayamel, I want to taste, I want to nap, I want to relax, I want to feed myself, I want to feed my family. What's wrong? King David is dreaming and says, I can't sleep at night because there's no Beis HaMikdash. I can't sleep at night because there's no redemption. I can't sleep at night because Mashiach didn't come. But the Jews want to eat. It's very easy for a leader to say, let me retreat into my chamber and try to pursue my dream in my own way. But the Rebbe took the cue of his father-in-law and took the treasures. The treasures meant his entire soul, his entire passion, his own treasure. The treasure called himself, his holiness, his saintliness, his godliness, his wisdom, his depth, his perspective, his purity, his idealism, and shared all of it, all of the time, with anybody who wished to take and absorb. His treasures, his father-in-law's treasures, the treasures of Torah, of godliness, of Kabbalah, of Chassidus, of Talmud, of Midrash, the treasures of the deepest elements of Torah and of serving God. Always turning to the people, to the Jews, and saying, we're soldiers on the front together. Did everybody respond? Not everybody responded, but some responded. When people saw how much he gave up, it inspired them also to give up a lot. The world learned this year about one such couple, the ambassadors of the Rebbe to Mumbai, India, Gavriel Noyach and Rivka Holzberg. They could have chosen another life, a much simpler life, and they would be justified according to all standards. But when they saw the person who gave all of the treasures to share that dream with people, they gave up all of their treasures to build a Beis HaMikdash in Mumbai. This is what God is telling David. To be a true leader, you have to believe in your people, and you have to give everything to your people. And when you empower them, they will surprise you. And instead of having an enormous amount of wealth to build your temple, you may not have that wealth because you gave it up, but you'll have the people. You'll have their souls. You'll have their hearts. Today we're here continuing on that march with an incomplete mission yet. So the chapter of this year talks about the giving of all of the treasures to the soldiers, so that the soldiers could find within themselves and within their hearts the power to complete the construction of God's presence in this world and bring redemption to a world so desperately in need of it. L'chaim, l'chaim. And now for our final melody.
Ki besimchos etzeyo
V'shalom tov balon ha'arim v'yakol simchot lechem b'chol matziyas le'yichalcha Ki besimchos etzeyo V'shalom tov balon ha'arim v'yakol simchot lechem b'chol matziyas le'yichalcha
L'chaim, 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 v'levracha. At the conclusion of our evening here of song and study and inspiration, I want to once again welcome all of you who have joined us here this evening, the special night of Yud Shevat. I also want to thank Cantor Beryl Zucker, who has joined us together with his Hasidic choir, Eli Marcus, and Pinchas Forst, and Yisrael David Shmueli, and Chaim Kansapolsky, and Yaron Levy, and Chani Zucker on the piano. Thank you very much. L'chaim, l'chaim, v'levracha to everybody. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. L'chaim.
L'chaim, l'chaim, brother. Teile Brüder, teile Brüder, was für der Weite sein, was für der Weite sein, ich will gerne das Leben und von so, was für der Weite sein, teile Brüder, was für der Weite sein, was für der Weite sein, ich will gerne das Leben und von so, was für der Weite sein, teile Brüder, teile Brüder, was für der Weite sein, teile Brüder, ich will gerne das Leben und von so,